The Lost Gospel of Thomas. The hidden sayings that could change everything you know about early Christianity. Once again, we venture into the hidden chambers of ancient Christianity, into texts that were deliberately concealed, forbidden, and nearly lost to history forever. I am Felipe Amaral, and today I will guide you through one of the most controversial, most debated, and most extraordinary discoveries in the history of biblical archaeology, the Gospel of Thomas. In December of 1945, in the desert sands of Egypt near the town of Nag Hammadi, a peasant farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Samman made a discovery that would shock the world of biblical scholarship. Hidden in a sealed jar buried beneath the cliffs were ancient manuscripts, codices containing texts that had not been seen for over 1600 years. Among these treasures was a complete copy of the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of 114 sayings attributed directly to Jesus Christ himself. This is not a gospel like Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. There is no birth narrative, no miracles, no crucifixion, no resurrection account. Instead, what we find are raw teachings, mysterious parables, challenging wisdom sayings, many of which echo the canonical Gospels but others that seem to come from a completely different understanding of who Jesus was and what he taught. Before we journey deep into this extraordinary text, let me pose to you the questions that will guide our exploration tonight. First, why was this gospel hidden away, buried in the Egyptian desert, preserved in secret while other gospels were being copied and distributed throughout the Christian world? Second, do these sayings genuinely preserve the words of Jesus, perhaps even earlier versions of his teachings than what we find in the canonical Gospels, or are they later inventions created by communities with radically different theological agendas? And third, what is the stunning discovery within this text that has caused some scholars to completely reconsider the origins of Christianity itself, a revelation so significant that we will save it for the final moments of our journey together? Keep these questions burning in your mind as we descend into the mystery of the Gospel of Thomas. And I promise you, what awaits at the end of this investigation will challenge everything you thought you knew about the teachings of Jesus and the diversity of early Christian thought. The surprise that emerges from this ancient text is more radical, more transformative, and more controversial than you can possibly imagine. But we must walk through the text carefully, examining its structure, its claims, its theology, before we can truly understand why this discovery matters and what it reveals about the hidden history of Christianity. If you are passionate about uncovering the hidden secrets of biblical history, about exploring the texts that were forbidden and the voices that were silenced, then subscribe to this channel right now so you do not miss a single episode of our journey through the lost Gospels of early Christianity. We are building a community of seekers, of questioners, of people who refuse to accept simple answers to complex questions about faith and history. Introduction: the discovery that shook biblical scholarship. To understand the Gospel of Thomas, we must begin not in the 1st century when these sayings were allegedly spoken, nor even in the 2nd or 3rd centuries when many scholars believe the text was composed, but in the 20th century, in the deserts of Upper Egypt, where a chance discovery brought this lost gospel back into human awareness after centuries of oblivion. The year was 1945. The Second World War was drawing to a close. In Egypt, far from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, life continued in patterns that had changed little for centuries. Farmers worked the land along the Nile. Bedouins traversed the desert. And in small villages, people lived much as their ancestors had lived for generations. Muhammad Ali al-Samman was one of these farmers, working land near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. One day in December, he and his brothers were digging for sabak, a soft soil used as fertilizer, near the Jabal al-Tarif cliffs. As they dug, they struck something hard, a large sealed jar, about a meter tall, made of red earthenware. Muhammad Ali later recounted that he hesitated to break the jar. Superstition suggested it might contain a jinn, an evil spirit that could bring harm. But the possibility that it might also contain gold or treasure overcame his fear. He smashed the jar open with his mattock. No gold spilled out. No jinn emerged. Instead, the jar contained books, 13 leather-bound papyrus codices, ancient manuscripts that had been carefully sealed and hidden more than 16 centuries earlier. Muhammad Ali had no idea what he had found. To him, these were just old books, potentially useful only for the papyrus that might be burned as fuel. But these were not just old books. They were among the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, rivaling even the Dead Sea Scrolls in their importance for understanding early Christianity. These codices contained 52 separate texts, many of which have been completely lost to history, known only by name from references in the writings of early church fathers who condemned them as heretical. Among these texts was the Gospel of Thomas, a complete copy in Coptic translation, containing 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. Scholars had known about the Gospel of Thomas from ancient references. Hippolytus, writing in the 3rd century, mentioned it. Origen, the great biblical scholar of the early church, knew of it. Eusebius, the 4th century church historian, listed it among disputed writings. But no complete copy had survived, or so scholars believed, until that December day when a farmer's mattock broke open a jar that had preserved what church authorities had tried to suppress. The journey of these manuscripts from the Egyptian desert to scholarly awareness is its own dramatic story. Muhammad Ali took the books home, where his mother, not understanding their value, burned some of the loose pages as kindling for the family oven. A local history teacher recognized that the remaining codices might have value and arranged for them to be shown to authorities in Cairo. From there, the manuscripts entered a complex world of antiquities dealers, scholars, governments, and institutions, scattered across multiple countries before finally being reunited and properly studied. The Gospel of Thomas was among the first texts to receive serious scholarly attention. When experts began to translate and analyze it, they realized they were dealing with something extraordinary. This was not just another apocryphal gospel filled with legendary tales about Jesus' childhood or post-resurrection appearances. This was a collection of sayings, some familiar from the canonical Gospels, others completely unknown, attributed directly to Jesus and claiming to be secret teachings delivered to his closest disciples. The text begins with a bold claim: these are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. The very first words announce that what follows are hidden teachings, not the public parables and sermons known from the canonical Gospels, but private instruction given to an inner circle. The attribution to Thomas, identified as Didymus Judas Thomas, immediately connects the text to the apostle known as Doubting Thomas in the Gospel of John, the one who refused to believe in the resurrection until he could touch Jesus' wounds. The structure of the Gospel of Thomas is stark and simple. There is no narrative framework. No stories of Jesus' birth, baptism, ministry, death, or resurrection. No miracles are described. No passion narrative unfolds. Instead, we find saying after saying, often introduced with the simple phrase, Jesus said, or occasionally with a brief dialogue between Jesus and his disciples or a question posed to him. This structure is significant. It suggests that the Gospel of Thomas belongs to a genre of ancient literature known as wisdom collections, similar to the biblical books of Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or the extra-biblical wisdom of Solomon. The focus is entirely on teaching, on the words of Jesus, on wisdom that must be understood and applied. The text assumes that salvation comes not through believing certain facts about Jesus but through understanding his teachings and achieving the knowledge they convey. When scholars first analyzed the Gospel of Thomas, debates immediately erupted. Some argued that this text preserved very early traditions, perhaps even sayings of Jesus that predated the written canonical Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, they suggested, might represent a stream of oral tradition independent of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, providing a window into the teachings of Jesus unfiltered by later theological development. Others vehemently disagreed. They pointed to Gnostic themes in many of the sayings, to terminology and concepts that suggested second-century composition, to dependence on the canonical Gospels rather than independence from them. The Gospel of Thomas, these scholars argued, was a late text created by Gnostic Christians who wanted to claim Jesus as the source of their distinctive teachings. The debate continues to this day. Scholars remain divided on fundamental questions about the Gospel of Thomas. When was it written? Where was it composed? Who wrote it, and for what community? Does it preserve authentic sayings of Jesus, and if so, which ones? How should its relationship to the canonical Gospels be understood? What is not in dispute is the extraordinary nature of this text and its significance for understanding the diversity of early Christianity. The Gospel of Thomas reveals that not all early Christians understood Jesus primarily as a divine Savior who died for sins and rose from the dead. Some communities, particularly in Syria and Egypt, emphasized Jesus as a wisdom teacher, a revealer of hidden knowledge, a guide to spiritual enlightenment that transcended the material world. The text also demonstrates that early Christian literature was far more diverse than the New Testament alone suggests. For every text that made it into the canon, numerous others circulated in early Christian communities, claiming apostolic authority, teaching about Jesus, shaping belief and practice. The Gospel of Thomas is just one example, but its discovery opened eyes to the rich and complex world of early Christian writings that were eventually suppressed, hidden, or lost. As we prepare to explore the content of the Gospel of Thomas, we must approach it with both openness and critical awareness. We should be open to the possibility that it preserves genuine traditions about Jesus' teachings, that it reflects how some early Christians understood their faith, that it challenges our assumptions about what early Christianity looked like. But we should also maintain critical awareness that this text makes claims that conflict with Orthodox Christianity, that it reflects theological perspectives that were rejected by the mainstream church, that it poses interpretive challenges that have no easy answers. The world of early Christianity revisited. To understand the Gospel of Thomas, we must once again immerse ourselves in the complex and diverse world of early Christianity, but this time we focus on streams of thought and practice that diverged from what eventually became orthodoxy. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christianity was not the unified religion we might imagine. There was no New Testament canon yet established. There was no creed that all Christians affirmed. There was no centralized church authority that could define belief and practice for all communities. Instead, Christianity existed as a network of communities scattered across the Roman Empire and beyond, communities that shared a common allegiance to Jesus but understood him and his message in strikingly different ways. In Rome, Christians emphasized the importance of apostolic succession, of bishops who could trace their authority back to Peter and Paul. Their understanding of Jesus focused on his death and resurrection as the means of salvation. They developed liturgical practices centered on the Eucharist. They valued unity and condemned what they saw as false teaching. In Syria, particularly in Edessa and other eastern cities, Christians developed their own distinctive traditions. The Gospel of Thomas may have originated in this region. Syrian Christianity emphasized asceticism, celibacy, and the rejection of worldly attachments. Jesus was understood primarily as a teacher of wisdom, a guide to spiritual perfection achieved through rigorous self-discipline and the attainment of secret knowledge. In Egypt, particularly in Alexandria, Christian thought was heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, especially Platonism. Alexandrian Christians engaged deeply with questions about the relationship between the material and spiritual realms, about the nature of God, about how divine truth could be known. Some Egyptian Christians moved in directions that emphasized gnosis, knowledge, as the key to salvation, developing complex cosmologies and mythologies to explain the origin and destiny of the soul. These different regional expressions of Christianity were not sealed off from each other. Ideas traveled. Texts circulated. Teachers moved from city to city. Christians in different regions were aware of each other and often in conflict with each other. Letters were exchanged. Emissaries were sent. Debates raged about fundamental questions: who was Jesus? What did he teach? How should his followers live? What was required for salvation? Into this diverse landscape, various Gospels emerged. The four that eventually became canonical, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were all written in the 1st century, though they were not immediately recognized as uniquely authoritative. Other Gospels circulated as well. The Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Philip, and of course, the Gospel of Thomas. Each of these texts reflected the concerns and beliefs of particular communities. Each claimed to preserve authentic traditions about Jesus. Each shaped the faith of those who read and cherished them. The Gospel of Thomas seems to have been particularly valued in Syria and Egypt. References to it appear in early Christian writings from these regions. Its emphasis on secret knowledge and its collection of wisdom sayings resonated with Christians who understood salvation primarily as enlightenment, as awakening to spiritual truth rather than as rescue from sin through Jesus' death and resurrection. But as Christianity developed and began to consolidate around certain key beliefs and practices, texts like the Gospel of Thomas became increasingly problematic. Church leaders in the 3rd and 4th centuries were working to define orthodoxy, to establish what all Christians should believe, to identify and exclude what they considered heresy. The Gospel of Thomas, with its lack of emphasis on Jesus' death and resurrection, with its suggestions that salvation came through knowledge rather than faith in Christ's atoning sacrifice, with its sometimes cryptic and even contradictory sayings, did not fit the emerging consensus. Athanasius, the 4th century bishop of Alexandria, issued an Easter letter in 367 CE that listed the 27 books that should be considered canonical scripture. The Gospel of Thomas was not on that list. Instead, Athanasius condemned it and other texts like it as heretical writings that should not be read in churches. This was not just theological judgment but practical instruction. Churches under Athanasius's authority were to remove these texts, to stop copying them, to suppress their use. It was likely in response to such directives that the Nag Hammadi codices were hidden. Someone, perhaps a monk from the nearby monastery of St. Pachomius, took these precious manuscripts and sealed them in a jar, burying them in the desert rather than destroying them. Whether this was an act of preservation in hopes that someday they could be retrieved, or simply a way to avoid actually burning sacred texts, we cannot know. But the result was that these texts survived, hidden in the dry Egyptian sand, waiting for 16 centuries until a farmer's mattock brought them back to light. The world that produced the Gospel of Thomas was a world of intense spiritual seeking. People were hungry for meaning, for understanding, for connection to the divine. The Roman Empire offered material prosperity and political order but little spiritual satisfaction. Traditional pagan religion seemed increasingly empty to many thoughtful people. Mystery religions promised secret knowledge and personal transformation but often at the price of expensive initiations and complex rituals. Into this context, Christianity offered something compelling, a message of divine love, of accessible salvation, of a God who became human to reveal truth and offer redemption. But Christianity itself was diverse enough to appeal to different types of seekers. Some were drawn to the communal worship and moral teaching of what would become Orthodox Christianity. Others were drawn to the promise of secret knowledge and spiritual enlightenment offered by texts like the Gospel of Thomas. The communities that valued the Gospel of Thomas were not necessarily organized into formal churches. They may have been loose networks of seekers, house groups that met for teaching and discussion, individuals who pursued wisdom through contemplation and ascetic practice. They saw themselves as the true Christians, the ones who understood the deeper meaning of Jesus' message, the ones who possessed the secret knowledge that could liberate the soul from the prison of material existence. This emphasis on secret knowledge is crucial to understanding the Gospel of Thomas. The text opens by claiming to contain secret sayings. Many of the individual sayings emphasize the importance of seeking, finding, and understanding hidden truths. The assumption throughout is that most people, even most Christians, do not understand the true meaning of Jesus' teachings. Only those who possess spiritual insight, who have achieved gnosis, can comprehend what Jesus really meant. This creates an interesting tension. On one hand, the Gospel of Thomas is more accessible than the canonical Gospels in some ways. It contains no complex narratives, no detailed theological arguments, just simple sayings. On the other hand, many of these sayings are deliberately obscure, paradoxical, even contradictory. They require interpretation, meditation, spiritual insight to understand. They are not meant to be read once and immediately comprehended but to be pondered, discussed, returned to repeatedly as one's spiritual understanding deepens. The Gospel of Thomas also reflects the influence of Jewish wisdom traditions. The format of the text, a collection of sayings attributed to a wise teacher, echoes books like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Many individual sayings use imagery and concepts familiar from Jewish scripture. But the text also incorporates Greek philosophical ideas, particularly the dualism between spirit and matter, between the eternal realm and the temporary material world, that characterized Platonic thought. This synthesis of Jewish and Greek elements was characteristic of Christianity in regions like Syria and Egypt. These were areas where different cultures intersected, where ideas flowed freely across traditional boundaries, where religious innovation flourished. The Gospel of Thomas is a product of this cultural melting pot, drawing on multiple traditions to articulate a vision of Jesus as the supreme wisdom teacher whose secret sayings could guide the soul to enlightenment and liberation. The sayings of the Gospel of Thomas. Now we turn to the text itself, to the actual sayings contained in the Gospel of Thomas. These 114 sayings range from the familiar to the bizarre, from the profound to the puzzling, from teachings that echo the canonical Gospels to statements that seem to contradict everything mainstream Christianity affirms. The text begins, as we have noted, with a bold claim: these are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. The phrase, "the living Jesus," is significant. It does not necessarily mean the resurrected Jesus but rather Jesus as the source of life, the revealer of living truth that transcends death. Thomas is identified as the scribe, the one who recorded these teachings, giving the text apostolic authority. Saying 1 immediately establishes the central theme: whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. Here is the promise that drives the entire text. Understanding these teachings is not just intellectually satisfying or spiritually enriching. It is salvific. It grants immortality. Death can be overcome not through Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection but through comprehending his secret wisdom. Many of the early sayings in the Gospel of Thomas have parallels in the canonical Gospels. Saying 2, for instance, speaks of seeking and finding, of being troubled and then marveling, of ruling and resting. This echoes themes found in Matthew chapter 7, though with different nuances. Saying 4 speaks of the first becoming last, reflecting a teaching found in multiple places in the Synoptic Gospels. But even these familiar-sounding sayings often have twists that suggest different meanings. Saying 5 is a good example: recognize what is in your sight, and that which is hidden from you will become plain to you. For there is nothing hidden which will not become manifest. This sounds similar to Jesus' teaching in the canonical Gospels about secrets being revealed. But the emphasis here is on recognition, on seeing truly what is already present, on the manifestation of hidden reality through proper perception. As we progress through the sayings, we encounter increasing strangeness. Saying 7 declares, "Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed by man, and cursed is the man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes man." This cryptic statement has baffled interpreters for decades. Is it about mastering animal passions? About spiritual transformation? About the relationship between the material and spiritual natures? The saying resists easy interpretation, demanding contemplation and spiritual insight. Saying 11 contains apocalyptic imagery reminiscent of canonical Gospels: "This heaven will pass away, and the one above it will pass away. The dead are not alive, and the living will not die." But then it adds a puzzling statement: "In the days when you consumed what is dead, you made it what is alive. When you come to dwell in the light, what will you do?" The saying moves from familiar eschatology to enigmatic questions about transformation and light. Some sayings directly challenge conventional religious practice. Saying 14 states, "If you fast, you will give rise to sin for yourselves, and if you pray, you will be condemned, and if you give alms, you will do harm to your spirits." This is shocking. Jesus in the canonical Gospels teaches his followers how to fast, pray, and give alms properly. But here, these religious practices themselves are condemned. The saying continues, "When you go into any land and walk about in the districts, if they receive you, eat what they will set before you, and heal the sick among them. For what goes into your mouth will not defile you, but that which issues from your mouth, it is that which will defile you." This saying reflects tensions in early Christianity about the value of traditional religious practices. The Gospel of Thomas seems to suggest that external observances are meaningless or even harmful. What matters is internal transformation, spiritual understanding, the words that come from your mouth revealing the state of your heart. Saying 18 records a question from the disciples, tell us how our end will be. Jesus' response is characteristically enigmatic, have you discovered, then, the beginning, that you look for the end? For where the beginning is, there will the end be. Blessed is he who will take his place in the beginning. He will know the end and will not experience death. Here we see a circular understanding of time and existence. Beginning and end are connected. To know the origin is to know the destiny. Salvation involves returning to the beginning, to the source, to the origin before the material world came into being. Saying 22 is one of the most discussed in the entire Gospel of Thomas. The disciples ask Jesus when they will enter the kingdom. Jesus responds, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male not be male nor the female female, when you fashion eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and a likeness in place of a likeness, then will you enter the kingdom. This saying has been interpreted in many ways. Some see it as teaching about spiritual androgyny, about transcending gender distinctions that belong to the material world. Others see it as describing mystical union, the overcoming of all dualities in a higher unity. Still others interpret it as metaphor for spiritual transformation so complete that ordinary categories of existence no longer apply. The saying defies simple interpretation, operating on multiple levels simultaneously. I want to pause here and ask you something. As you listen to these mysterious, challenging sayings, which ones resonate with you? Which ones trouble you? Drop a comment below and tell me which saying from the Gospel of Thomas has struck you most powerfully so far. Are these the words of Jesus, or something else entirely? Your perspective matters, and I am genuinely curious to hear what you think. Saying 24 contains a beautiful image. There is light within a man of light, and he lights up the whole world. If he does not shine, he is darkness. This resonates with Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount about being the light of the world. But the Gospel of Thomas makes the light internal, inherent in the person who has achieved enlightenment, rather than reflecting Christ's light to others. Saying 29 is deeply paradoxical. If the flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of the body, it is a wonder of wonders. Indeed, I am amazed at how this great wealth has made its home in this poverty. This saying grapples with the relationship between material and spiritual, between body and soul. The tone is one of wonder rather than condemnation of the material world, but there is also astonishment that spirit could be associated with flesh at all. Saying 37 records the disciples asking when Jesus will become revealed to them. Jesus responds, when you disrobe without being ashamed and take up your garments and place them under your feet like little children and tread on them, then will you see the Son of the Living One, and you will not be afraid. The imagery of disrobing and trampling garments suggests stripping away material existence, rejecting embodiment, returning to a state of primal innocence. Only then, the saying suggests, can true spiritual vision occur. Saying 42 is the shortest in the entire Gospel, become passers-by. 2 words in English, a terse command to detach from the world, to move through it without becoming attached to it, to maintain the stance of a traveler who belongs elsewhere. This reflects the ascetic impulse in Syrian Christianity, the idea that this world is not our home, that we should pass through it without putting down roots. Saying 50 presents a cosmology. If they say to you, where did you come from, say to them, we came from the light, the place where the light came into being on its own accord and established itself and became manifest through their image. If they say to you, is it you, say, we are its children, we are the elect of the living Father. If they ask you, what is the sign of your Father in you, say to them, it is movement and repose. This saying provides answers to existential questions about origin and identity. We come from light. We are children of light. The divine sign within us is movement and rest, the fundamental rhythm of existence. Saying 51 records another question, when will the repose of the dead come about, and when will the new world come? Jesus' answer redirects the question: what you look forward to has already come, but you do not recognize it. This realized eschatology suggests that the kingdom is not a future event but a present reality available to those who have eyes to see. The transformation people await has already occurred, but they remain unaware of it because they have not achieved the necessary spiritual insight. Saying 61 contains a fascinating dialogue. Jesus says to Salome, "Two will rest on a bed. The one will die, and the other will live." Salome asks who he is that he should recline on her couch and eat from her table. Jesus responds, "I am he who exists from the undivided. I was given some of the things of my Father." Salome declares, "I am your disciple." Jesus then says, "Therefore I say, if he is destroyed, he will be filled with light, but if he is divided, he will be filled with darkness." The saying moves from enigmatic statement to profound teaching about wholeness and division, unity and fragmentation. Saying 70 is both simple and devastating: if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This places the burden of salvation entirely on the individual. You contain within yourself both the means of salvation and the seeds of destruction. Which manifests depends on whether you actualize your inner potential or suppress it. Saying 77 makes an extraordinary claim: "It is I who am the light which is above them all. It is I who am the all. From me did the all come forth, and unto me did the all extend. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." This saying presents Jesus as the cosmic Christ, the divine presence permeating all reality. He is not just a teacher or even a divine being separate from creation. He is the all, the source and goal of everything that exists. And yet he is also immanent, present in the most mundane objects, in wood and stone. Saying 79 records a woman in the crowd blessing Jesus' mother. Jesus responds, "Blessed are those who have heard the word of the Father and have truly kept it. For there will be days when you will say, 'Blessed are the womb which has not conceived and the breasts which have not given milk.'" This saying takes a statement found in Luke's Gospel and extends it in a direction that emphasizes the superiority of spiritual birth over physical birth, of hearing and keeping God's word over biological motherhood. Saying 86 is striking in its stark contrast between Jesus and the world. The foxes have their holes and the birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head and rest. This saying appears also in the canonical Gospels, but in the Gospel of Thomas it stands alone, emphasizing the radical homelessness of the enlightened one, the one who belongs to the spiritual realm and finds no rest in the material world. Saying 108 declares, "He who will drink from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he, and the things that are hidden will be revealed to him." This is perhaps the clearest statement in the Gospel of Thomas of mystical union between Jesus and the disciple. Through receiving his teaching, the disciple becomes like Jesus, and Jesus becomes the disciple. In this union, hidden things are revealed. The distinction between teacher and student collapses into identity. Saying 113 records the disciples asking when the kingdom will come. Jesus responds, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." This realized eschatology appears also in Luke chapter 17, but the Gospel of Thomas gives it particular emphasis. The kingdom is not future but present, not localized but spread everywhere, not hidden but invisible to those who lack spiritual sight. The final saying, 114, is perhaps the most controversial in the entire text. Simon Peter says to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus responds, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." This saying has provoked intense debate and strong reactions. On the surface, it appears deeply misogynistic, suggesting that women must somehow become male to achieve salvation. Some scholars interpret it as reflecting ancient beliefs about gender hierarchy, where maleness represented spiritual perfection and femaleness represented material limitation. Others see it as metaphorical, about transcending gender distinctions entirely in the spiritual realm. Still others argue it reflects later editorial additions to the text, not original to the Gospel of Thomas. Regardless of how we interpret it, this saying demonstrates that even texts valued by early Christian communities could contain ideas that we find troubling or offensive today. Human perspective and emotional context in the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the Gospel of Nicodemus with its dramatic narratives and cosmic battles, the Gospel of Thomas offers no stories, no emotional scenes, no human drama. Yet behind these stark sayings lie profound human concerns: the search for meaning, the fear of death, the hunger for enlightenment, the longing to transcend the limitations of material existence. Imagine the person who first encountered these teachings. Perhaps they were living in 2nd century Syria or Egypt, part of a Christian community that gathered in homes to study and discuss the words of Jesus. The canonical Gospels circulated in their community, but so did other texts, other collections of sayings, other interpretations of what Jesus taught. This person is troubled by questions. What happens when we die? Is there truly life beyond this existence, or is death simply the end? The promises of resurrection seem abstract, distant. But here in the Gospel of Thomas is a different promise: understand these sayings, achieve the knowledge they convey, and you will not experience death. Not in some future resurrection, but now, in this present moment. Death can be overcome through enlightenment. This person is also troubled by the gap between the spiritual ideals they hear preached and the messy reality of embodied existence. Hunger, desire, illness, aging, the constant pull of material needs and bodily appetites. Is the body simply a burden, a prison from which the soul must escape? Some sayings in the Gospel of Thomas suggest exactly that. Become passers-by. Do not make the flesh your dwelling. The world is not worthy of you. But other sayings complicate this simple dualism. Jesus declares that he is present in wood and stone, in the material world itself. The kingdom is spread upon the earth. The light dwells within the body. So the relationship between spirit and matter is not simple rejection but complex interpenetration. The challenge is to recognize the spiritual reality within and behind material existence, not to escape the body but to see through it to the light that animates it. For someone drawn to ascetic practice, to fasting and celibacy and renunciation of worldly attachments, the Gospel of Thomas provided validation and encouragement. Jesus himself had no place to rest. He taught detachment from family ties. He promised that those who strip away the garments of material existence will see the Son of the Living One. The path is difficult, demanding, requiring complete transformation of how one relates to the body and the world. But the reward is nothing less than transcendence of death itself. For someone frustrated with religious institutions and their emphasis on external practices, the Gospel of Thomas offered a different path. Saying 14's condemnation of fasting, prayer, and almsgiving must have been liberating for those who felt burdened by ritual requirements. What mattered was not outward observance but inner transformation, not participation in religious ceremonies but achievement of spiritual understanding. Yet this path also had its challenges. The sayings are deliberately obscure. They resist simple interpretation. They require meditation, discussion, spiritual insight. Some seem to contradict each other. How can the flesh be worthless and yet Jesus be present in all material things? How can the kingdom be both already present and yet something we enter only after profound transformation? How can we both honor Jesus as the supreme teacher and yet be told that we will become like him, that he will become us? These paradoxes were not problems to be solved but mysteries to be contemplated. The Gospel of Thomas operated on the assumption that spiritual truth cannot be captured in clear propositions or logical arguments. It must be experienced, realized, achieved through a transformation of consciousness that goes beyond ordinary understanding. The communities that valued the Gospel of Thomas likely saw themselves as an elite, as those who possessed secret knowledge that most Christians lacked. This created a sense of special identity, of being initiated into mysteries that the masses could not comprehend. But it also created distance from other Christians, from those who emphasized faith in Christ's death and resurrection rather than knowledge of his secret teachings. The emotional tone of the Gospel of Thomas is difficult to characterize because it offers so little narrative context. But certain themes recur that suggest the emotional landscape of the communities that treasured it. There is a sense of alienation from the world, of not belonging here, of being strangers and exiles. There is intense focus on the individual's spiritual journey, on personal transformation rather than communal worship or collective identity. There is both confidence, the certainty that understanding these sayings brings immortality, and anxiety, the fear of not achieving the necessary insight, of remaining trapped in ignorance and death. For women in these communities, the Gospel of Thomas presented particular challenges. While some sayings suggest that gender distinctions will be transcended in the spiritual realm, saying 114's claim that Mary must be made male to enter the kingdom reflects patriarchal assumptions that devalued femaleness. Yet women were clearly part of these communities, and some texts associated with Thomas Christianity, like the Gospel of Mary, give prominent roles to female disciples. The tension reflects broader struggles in early Christianity about the status and role of women. The person seeking enlightenment through the Gospel of Thomas embarked on a difficult path. They were encouraged to question everything, to see through material appearances to spiritual reality, to detach from worldly attachments, to seek the light within. But they were also warned that the path was narrow, that few would find it, that understanding required more than intellectual effort but spiritual transformation. The sayings offered glimpses of profound truth: you are light, you come from light, you will return to light. The kingdom is already present if you have eyes to see. The divine is not distant but immediately present in all things. Death is not inevitable but can be overcome through knowledge. These were not just theological propositions but transformative insights that could reshape one's entire existence. Yet the path could also be lonely and difficult. If most people, even most Christians, do not understand these teachings, then the seeker is isolated, part of a small community of the enlightened surrounded by the uncomprehending masses. If salvation depends on achieving gnosis, on understanding secret sayings, then there is constant anxiety about whether one has truly understood, whether one has achieved the necessary insight, whether one will attain immortality or remain trapped in death. The Gospel of Thomas does not offer the comfort of a community gathered around the Eucharist, remembering Christ's sacrifice, assured of salvation through faith in his death and resurrection. Instead, it offers the challenge of an individual quest for enlightenment, a difficult path of spiritual transformation, a promise of immortality for those who achieve the necessary knowledge. For some, this was liberating, empowering, a call to spiritual excellence. For others, it was burdensome, anxiety-producing, an impossible standard that left them uncertain of their salvation. Spiritual reflection and interpretation. The Gospel of Thomas challenges us to think differently about Jesus, about his teachings, about the nature of salvation, and about what early Christianity actually looked like. Whether or not we accept its claims as authentic, whether or not we embrace its theology, we must reckon with what it represents, an alternative vision of Christianity that flourished in some regions and communities before being suppressed and nearly lost to history. At the heart of the Gospel of Thomas is a fundamentally different understanding of what Jesus accomplished and what he offers to his followers. In the canonical Gospels and in Orthodox Christian theology, Jesus is primarily understood as Savior. He came to die for our sins, to reconcile humanity to God through his sacrificial death, to defeat death through his resurrection. Salvation comes through faith in him, through trusting in what he has done on our behalf. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is primarily understood as revealer. He came to teach secret wisdom, to convey knowledge that can liberate the soul from ignorance and death. Salvation comes not through faith in his atoning sacrifice but through understanding his teachings, through achieving the gnosis that transforms consciousness and overcomes mortality. The cross and resurrection, so central to canonical Christianity, are completely absent from the Gospel of Thomas. What matters is the living Jesus, the teacher of wisdom, the revealer of hidden truth. This difference is not merely about emphasis but about fundamental understanding of the human problem and its solution. For Orthodox Christianity, the human problem is sin, rebellion against God, moral failure that separates us from our Creator. The solution is forgiveness, redemption through Christ's sacrifice, restoration of relationship with God through His mediation. For the Christianity reflected in the Gospel of Thomas, the human problem is ignorance, lack of knowledge about our true nature and origin. The solution is enlightenment, gnosis, awakening to the reality that we are beings of light trapped temporarily in material existence. These different diagnostics lead to different prescriptions. Orthodox Christianity emphasizes grace, the unearned gift of salvation offered to those who believe. The Gospel of Thomas emphasizes effort, the difficult work of achieving understanding, of stripping away illusion, of recognizing hidden truth. Orthodox Christianity is fundamentally communal, centered on the gathered church, on shared worship, on mutual support in faith. The Gospel of Thomas is fundamentally individual, focused on personal transformation, on the solitary quest for enlightenment. Yet we should not draw these contrasts too sharply. Even Orthodox Christianity values knowledge and understanding. Even the Gospel of Thomas assumes community, disciples learning together, teachers passing on wisdom. The differences are real but exist on a spectrum rather than as absolute oppositions. The Gospel of Thomas also challenges our assumptions about the historical Jesus. If some of these sayings are authentic, if they preserve early oral tradition independent of the canonical Gospels, then we must expand our picture of what Jesus taught. We must acknowledge that Jesus may have spoken in more varied ways, addressed more diverse concerns, used more paradoxical language than the canonical Gospels alone suggest. Some scholars have argued that certain sayings in the Gospel of Thomas may indeed be early, perhaps even earlier than their parallels in the canonical Gospels. The format of isolated sayings without narrative framework might reflect the way Jesus' teachings were initially preserved and transmitted, as memorable aphorisms passed along orally before being incorporated into the narrative Gospels. If this is true, then the Gospel of Thomas, for all its later Gnostic interpretation, may preserve echoes of the historical Jesus' voice. Other scholars remain skeptical. They point to the clearly Gnostic themes in many sayings, to the emphasis on secret knowledge and the devaluation of the material world, as evidence of second-century composition. They argue that the Gospel of Thomas represents not early tradition but late theological development, a Gnostic community's attempt to claim Jesus as the source of their distinctive teachings. The debate cannot be easily resolved because we lack sufficient evidence. We do not know when the Gospel of Thomas was composed. We do not know who wrote it. We do not know which sayings, if any, go back to Jesus himself. We are left with judgment calls, with probabilities rather than certainties, with competing interpretations that reflect different scholarly methods and assumptions. What we can say with confidence is that the Gospel of Thomas reveals the remarkable diversity of early Christianity. The early church was not a monolithic institution with uniform beliefs but a complex movement encompassing multiple perspectives, multiple interpretations of Jesus, multiple understandings of salvation. Some of these perspectives eventually became orthodox, codified in creeds and canons. Others were marginalized, condemned as heretical, suppressed and nearly lost. The discovery of the Gospel of Thomas and the other Nag Hammadi texts has forced us to acknowledge this diversity and to ask difficult questions about how and why certain texts and teachings became orthodox while others were rejected. Was it simply a matter of truth defeating error? Or did political factors, institutional interests, and accidents of history play significant roles in determining which forms of Christianity survived and which disappeared? The Gospel of Thomas also speaks to contemporary spiritual seekers in ways that surprise many. In an age skeptical of institutional religion and attracted to personal spirituality, to meditation and mindfulness, to inner transformation rather than external observance, the Gospel of Thomas resonates. Its emphasis on the kingdom already present within, on finding the light within yourself, on the individual's spiritual journey, appeals to those who find traditional Christianity too focused on doctrinal conformity and institutional authority. Yet we must also acknowledge the dangers in the Gospel of Thomas's approach. The emphasis on secret knowledge can create spiritual elitism, a sense that only the enlightened few truly understand while the masses remain in darkness. The devaluation of the body and material existence can lead to unhealthy asceticism, to denial of legitimate human needs, to contempt for the created order that God called good. The focus on individual transformation can undermine community, can leave people isolated in their quest for gnosis, can fail to address systemic injustice and communal responsibility. The question of gender in the Gospel of Thomas particularly troubles modern readers. Saying 114's suggestion that women must become male reflects ancient assumptions about gender hierarchy that we rightly reject. Yet some scholars argue that in the context of ancient thought, this saying may have been more liberating than it appears, suggesting that gender distinctions themselves are part of the material realm to be transcended, that women can achieve the same spiritual status as men, that in the realm of spirit there is neither male nor female. The big surprise: what scholars discovered that changes everything. And now we arrive at the moment I promised you at the beginning of our journey. The stunning discovery within the Gospel of Thomas that has caused some scholars to completely reconsider their understanding of Christian origins. This is not just another interesting detail or curious saying. This is a finding that potentially rewrites the history of how the Gospels were composed and challenges fundamental assumptions about the relationship between oral and written tradition in early Christianity. The discovery is this: when scholars carefully analyzed the Gospel of Thomas and compared it systematically with the canonical Gospels, they found something extraordinary. Many of the sayings in Thomas that have parallels in Matthew and Luke appear in forms that are simpler, more primitive, less developed theologically than their canonical counterparts. More significantly, these sayings appear to be independent of the narrative frameworks that Matthew and Luke provide for them. They exist as isolated units, without the connecting tissue that joins them to surrounding material in the canonical Gospels. This observation led to a revolutionary hypothesis. For over a century, biblical scholars had theorized that Matthew and Luke, when composing their Gospels, drew on two main sources, the Gospel of Mark and a hypothetical collection of Jesus's sayings that scholars labeled Q, from the German word Quelle meaning source. This Q source was believed to have been a written document containing primarily sayings of Jesus, which both Matthew and Luke independently used when writing their Gospels. But Q was purely theoretical. No copy of it had ever been found. No ancient writer mentioned it by name. It was inferred to exist based on the patterns of agreement between Matthew and Luke in passages where they share material not found in Mark. The Gospel of Thomas changes everything. Here, discovered in the Egyptian desert, is an actual ancient collection of Jesus's sayings, existing independently of any narrative framework. Here is concrete evidence that such collections actually circulated in early Christianity. Here is a text that looks remarkably like what scholars had imagined Q to be, a compilation of wisdom sayings attributed to Jesus, organized thematically rather than narratively, valued by communities that emphasize Jesus as wisdom teacher rather than primarily as crucified and risen Savior. Some scholars went further. They proposed that the Gospel of Thomas might actually be related to Q, that it might represent a development of the same tradition, perhaps even that an early version of Thomas could be very close to the original Q source that Matthew and Luke used. If this is true, then the Gospel of Thomas is not just another apocryphal text but a window into the very earliest layer of Christian tradition, predating even the canonical Gospels, preserving the teachings of Jesus in a form closer to how they were originally remembered and transmitted. This hypothesis remains controversial. Not all scholars accept it. Some argue that the Gospel of Thomas is clearly dependent on the canonical Gospels, that it shows knowledge of Matthew and Luke and simply extracts sayings from their narrative contexts. They point to certain Thomasine sayings that seem to combine elements from different canonical Gospels in ways that suggest the author knew written texts rather than independent oral tradition. But other scholars have demonstrated that many sayings in Thomas appear in more primitive forms than their canonical parallels, that they lack the editorial changes and theological developments that Matthew and Luke introduced, that they preserve earlier versions of Jesus's teachings. The debate is technical, involving detailed analysis of individual sayings, comparison of wording and structure, arguments about which forms are more original. But the stakes are enormous. If the Gospel of Thomas preserves early tradition independent of the canonical Gospels, then we must revise our entire understanding of how Christianity developed. We must acknowledge that the emphasis on Jesus as wisdom teacher, on his sayings rather than his death and resurrection, was not a late Gnostic innovation but was present from the very beginning, existing alongside and in tension with the death and resurrection-focused Christianity that eventually became Orthodox. We must also reconsider the process by which the canonical Gospels were composed. If Matthew and Luke drew on a saying source similar to Thomas, then they made deliberate choices to embed these sayings in narrative frameworks, to connect them to stories of Jesus' ministry, to interpret them in light of his death and resurrection. The canonical Gospels are not just recordings of what happened but theological constructions, carefully crafted presentations that shape how readers understand Jesus and his message. This does not diminish the value or authority of the canonical Gospels. But it does remind us that they are interpretive documents, that they reflect the perspectives and theological convictions of their authors, that they made choices about what to include, how to organize material, how to frame Jesus' teachings. The Gospel of Thomas represents a different set of choices, a different way of organizing and presenting Jesus' wisdom, a different understanding of what mattered most about his message. The implications extend even further. If wisdom collections like Thomas circulated widely in early Christianity, representing one major stream of Jesus' tradition, while passion narratives focusing on his death and resurrection represented another stream, then the eventual merger of these streams in the canonical Gospels was not inevitable but was the result of specific historical developments and theological decisions. Orthodox Christianity, with its emphasis on the crucified and risen Christ, won out over wisdom Christianity, with its emphasis on Jesus the enlightened teacher. But for a time, both existed, both claimed to preserve authentic tradition about Jesus, both shaped the faith of Christian communities. The Gospel of Thomas also suggests that early Christian literature was more diverse, more experimental, more fluid than we often imagine. Texts circulated in multiple versions. Sayings were added, removed, rearranged. Different communities valued different collections, different interpretations, different emphases. The process of canonization, of determining which texts would be considered authoritative scripture, was long, contentious, and shaped by factors beyond just determining what was authentic or apostolic. This discovery challenges the assumption that Christian orthodoxy simply preserved the original apostolic teaching while heresies represented later corruptions. Instead, diversity was there from the beginning. Different interpretations of Jesus coexisted. Different communities emphasized different aspects of his message. What became orthodox was not simply what was original but what won out in complex historical processes involving theological argument, political power, institutional development, and sometimes accident of survival. For believers, this can be unsettling. It means we cannot simply assume that our current understanding of Christianity is exactly what the apostles taught, that the New Testament canon perfectly preserves everything important about Jesus, that alternative perspectives were obviously wrong and rightly excluded. History is messier than that. The development of Christianity was more complex, more contested, more contingent than neat stories of apostolic succession and preservation of pure truth suggest. But this can also be liberating. It means we can engage with texts like the Gospel of Thomas not as threatening heresies but as witnesses to the remarkable diversity of early Christian thought. We can learn from them even if we do not accept all their claims. We can appreciate the concerns they addressed, the questions they answered, the spiritual needs they met for the communities that valued them. The Gospel of Thomas reminds us that Christianity has never been as uniform as we sometimes imagine, that from the very beginning multiple voices claimed to speak for Jesus, multiple interpretations competed for acceptance, multiple visions of what it meant to follow him existed side by side. Engaging seriously with this diversity does not undermine faith but enriches it, challenges us to think more deeply about what we believe and why, connects us to the full richness of the Christian tradition in all its complexity. Now I want to hear from you one more time before we close. After everything we have explored together, after seeing how the Gospel of Thomas challenges our assumptions about early Christianity, what is your honest reaction? Does this text threaten your faith or enrich it? Does it feel like discovering hidden truth or encountering dangerous error? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is not just my investigation, it is our collective journey into the mysteries of Christian origins. Conclusion: the wisdom that challenges and transforms. We have journeyed together through the Gospel of Thomas, exploring its discovery, examining its sayings, considering its theology, and grappling with its implications for understanding early Christianity. As we conclude, it is worth reflecting on why this text matters, what we can learn from it, and how it challenges us to think differently about the Christian tradition. The Gospel of Thomas matters because it represents voices that were silenced, perspectives that were marginalized, questions that were suppressed. For 16 centuries, this text lay buried in the Egyptian desert, hidden away because it did not fit the emerging consensus about what Christianity should be. Its rediscovery reminds us that history is written by the winners, that much was lost when certain forms of Christianity triumphed over others, that recovering these lost voices can expand our understanding of the richness and diversity of early Christian thought. The text also matters because it challenges simplistic narratives about Christian origins. We cannot simply say that Jesus taught a clear message, that the apostles faithfully transmitted it, that the early church uniformly believed and practiced what would become Orthodox Christianity. The reality was far more complex. Multiple interpretations of Jesus coexisted. Different communities emphasized different aspects of his message. What we now call orthodoxy emerged through a long historical process that involved not just theological discernment but political power, institutional authority, and the accidents of which texts and traditions survived. Engaging with the Gospel of Thomas invites us to ask difficult questions. Why was this text suppressed? What legitimate concerns led early church leaders to reject it? But also, what was lost when it was buried? What insights, what perspectives, what aspects of Jesus' teaching might have been marginalized along with it? Can we retrieve anything valuable from this text without abandoning core Christian convictions about who Jesus was and what he accomplished? These are not easy questions, and they do not have simple answers. Different people, approaching from different perspectives and with different commitments, will answer them differently. But the questions themselves are valuable. They force us to think critically about how Christianity developed, how canons were formed, how authority was established, how certain voices were elevated while others were suppressed. The Gospel of Thomas also speaks to contemporary spiritual seeking in ways that surprise many. Its emphasis on the kingdom already present within, on inner light, on personal transformation through understanding, resonates with people who find traditional Christianity too focused on external authority and doctrinal conformity. Yet we must also be honest about the limitations and dangers in the Thomas approach, the potential for spiritual elitism, the devaluation of the body and material existence, the loss of community and communal responsibility. Perhaps the most important lesson from the Gospel of Thomas is humility. Humility about what we know and do not know about the historical Jesus. Humility about the development of Christian tradition and the contingency of what became Orthodox. Humility about our own interpretations and the possibility that others, approaching from different perspectives, might see things we have missed. This does not mean abandoning convictions or embracing relativism where all interpretations are equally valid. It means holding our convictions with appropriate tentativeness, remaining open to new evidence and new perspectives, recognizing that our understanding is always partial, always influenced by our particular locations and commitments. The Gospel of Thomas will continue to fascinate, trouble, and challenge readers. Scholars will continue to debate its origins, its authenticity, its relationship to the canonical Gospels. Believers will continue to wrestle with how to relate to a text that claims to preserve Jesus' secret teachings but was excluded from the biblical canon. Seekers will continue to find in its mysterious sayings resources for their spiritual journeys. Whatever our final judgments about the Gospel of Thomas, we cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend that early Christianity was simpler or more uniform than it actually was. We cannot deny that texts like this circulated widely, shaped communities, provided frameworks for understanding Jesus and his message. We must engage with this diversity, learn from it, and allow it to deepen and complicate our understanding of the tradition we have inherited. Before we part ways, I want to invite you into this ongoing exploration one final time. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because we are just beginning to uncover the lost Gospels and hidden texts of early Christianity. Each episode reveals another layer of the complex, diverse, fascinating world of the early Church. We will explore the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Philip, the secret book of John, and so many more texts that were buried, forbidden, and nearly lost forever. Share this video with anyone you know who is interested in biblical history, in the origins of Christianity, in the texts that did not make it into the Bible but shaped the faith of millions. Let us build a community of seekers, of questioners, of people who are not afraid to look at the complexity and messiness of how Christianity actually developed. And please, engage in the comments. Tell me which saying from the Gospel of Thomas struck you most powerfully. Share your interpretation of the difficult passages. Let me know whether you think this text preserves authentic words of Jesus or represents later theological innovation. Your voice matters. Your perspective enriches our collective understanding. This is not a lecture but a conversation, and I genuinely want to hear what you think. The journey we have taken tonight through the Gospel of Thomas is not just an academic exercise in ancient history. It is an invitation to think more deeply about faith itself, about how traditions develop, about how authority is established, about what it means to seek truth in the face of competing claims and conflicting testimonies. The peasant farmer who broke open that jar in the Egyptian desert in 1945 could never have imagined the revolution his discovery would spark in biblical scholarship. He was looking for fertilizer and found instead a library that had been hidden for 16 centuries. Those monks or believers who sealed these texts in that jar, who buried them in the sand rather than burned them, preserved for us a gift beyond measure, the voices of early Christians who saw Jesus differently, who understood salvation differently, who organized their spiritual lives around different priorities than those that eventually became orthodox. We stand now as inheritors of both traditions, the Orthodox Christianity that survived and flourished, and the suppressed Christianity that was buried and forgotten. We have access to both the canonical Gospels that shaped 2 millennia of Christian faith and the lost Gospels that reveal the roads not taken, the interpretations not accepted, the questions not answered by mainstream tradition. What we do with this inheritance matters. We can ignore the Gospel of Thomas, dismiss it as heresy, and pretend that Christianity was always as uniform as we once believed. Or we can engage with it seriously, learn from it thoughtfully, and allow it to enrich our understanding of the complexity and diversity that characterized Christianity from its very beginning. The secret sayings that open this gospel promise that whoever finds their interpretation will not experience death. Whether we take that promise literally or metaphorically, whether we believe these sayings come from Jesus himself or from later communities seeking to understand him, the challenge remains the same: to seek, to question, to interpret, to understand. The life promised by the Gospel of Thomas is not passive reception of doctrine but active engagement with mystery, not comfortable certainty but transformative seeking. As you leave this exploration and return to your daily life, carry with you the questions this text raises. Wonder about the diversity that has always existed within Christianity. Question the processes by which some voices were amplified and others silenced. Seek the wisdom that might be found even in texts that challenge your assumptions and unsettle your certainties. And remember that the light the Gospel of Thomas speaks of, the light that is within you and around you, the light from which we came and to which we return, is not confined to any single text or tradition. Truth has a way of breaking through, even when buried in desert sand for 16 centuries, even when suppressed by authorities who fear its implications, even when forgotten by generations who thought they had the complete story. The Gospel of Thomas has emerged from its tomb. Its sayings are available now for all who wish to read them, to study them, to wrestle with them. What interpretation will you find? What hidden truth will be revealed to you? What transformation awaits those who seriously engage with these challenging, mysterious, profound words attributed to the living Jesus? The journey does not end here. It continues in your own seeking, your own questioning, your own encounter with these ancient texts and the living traditions they represent. May you seek wisely, question courageously, and find abundantly. And may the light that the Gospel of Thomas proclaims, whether you find it within these sayings or elsewhere in your spiritual journey, guide you toward truth, toward understanding, toward that life which transcends death itself. Thank you for journeying with me into the hidden wisdom of early Christianity. Until we meet again to explore another lost gospel, another forgotten voice, another secret teaching that challenges everything we thought we knew, I am Felipe Amaral, reminding you that the past is never truly past, that buried treasures await discovery, and that the quest for truth is the most human, most divine pursuit we can undertake. Subscribe, comment, share, and continue seeking. The greatest discoveries are still ahead. The secret sayings are waiting to be interpreted. And the living Jesus, whoever and whatever that means to you, continues to speak across the centuries to those who have ears to hear. Until next time, keep searching for the light within, keep questioning the stories you have been told, and keep believing that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to break through into the light.